Welcome back to Holistic Healing Association. I'm Erin Darcy. I'm certified in embodied processing and clinical hypnosis. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Sarah Peyton, who's a trainer in nonviolent communication. She specializes in trauma and helps people around the world communicate with nonviolent communication. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining
Oh,
us.
thank you, Erin, for having me.
And would you like to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I got involved in nonviolent communication um, because it's the way Marshall Rosenberg described it in his writing and when he was speaking, it just sounded like such a better way to be in conflict and to resolve conflict than anything I had ever seen. And then when I started to get into it, I realized, oh my God, this is a hugely important healing modality for changing the way that trauma impacts our brains. And my largest conflicts were with my child because I had disorganized attachment from my own traumatic childhood. And it really messed with the rhythms, the regular rhythms and responses of parenting.
Okay, thank you. And have you experienced then yourself a trauma in your life?
Yes, yes. My mom had dissociative identity disorder when I was growing up with her. Well, she had it her whole life, but it impacted me mostly when I was very small, as mental illness does. And so I came out of childhood with a brain that was very uncomfortable to live in. A little bit like Unleash the Dogs of War, kind of let's destroy a little bit of a let's destroy Sarah brain, which is part of the after effects of trauma. We kind of turn in on ourselves and attack ourselves because the outer world, we can't do anything about the insanity of the outer world. And so we try to change ourselves with violence, with internal violence.
All right, thank
Yeah.
you. And for all the parents out there, what is a healthy, effective approach to communicating with your children when conflict arises, when they need to have their children listen to them? How can we effectively talk to our children in a healthy, nurturing way?
Mm. Well, it begins at every moment. So conflict is just an arising of tensions from the regular web of interaction. So when we begin to change the kind of the web of how we are in relationship with our children, then we also change the conflict. So it doesn't help very much to just focus on the conflict times. It's very helpful to focus on the whole relational space and what it feels like, and whether a child has any sense of being respected and being able to respect their parents, which is tricky when trauma has been in the background of the parents, mm, because trauma really, really changes brains and makes it hard for brains to stay calm. And so then when tensions arise, all of a sudden we hear those sharp voices and loud outbursts, and if we're lucky, it just stays in the verbal realm and doesn't go into objects being thrown and people being hit. But there's so much room for all kinds of difficult experiences when we're parenting, especially if we're parenting with a brain that doesn't stay calm very easily, or that is entirely dissociated. I think I stayed pretty calm, but I was almost entirely dissociated. So
And
that
as
didn't
a,
give,
sorry, go ahead.
oh, and that didn't give my kid very much to hang on to. Yeah.
And that's very common. Almost
Yeah.
everyone with trauma has dissociated, and it's something to be aware of, and it's something we can, it's a safety, it's a coping mechanism, right? It's a way to protect us. But
Yeah.
the more we heal, the more we're able to dissociate less.
Yeah. And that's such good news, isn't it?
Exactly. So when we're healing and we start our healing journey, then we're able to bring that to our children
And
and
to other
we're
con.
and exactly to the world, to many relationships, and we're able to communicate in a healthier, more nurturing manner.
Yeah.
And you basically just answered my question that I was going to ask next. But how does trauma impact us when we are in conflict with another person?
Well, what happens technically is that the amygdala gets all fired up. And it that's a part of the limbic system, which is where the memories of trauma live and where intense emotions live. So when the amygdala has the sense that it wants to contribute, it takes over the brain unless we have strong resonant responses to the self that come from solid relationship where we can just stay steady and stay self-connected. This morning, I woke up to a wonderful email message from a friend of mine who was making guesses about how it was for me to have violated confidentiality in a client exchange. It was very alarming for me to have done this, and I was trying to make repairs. And my friend gave me this wonderful resonant empathy guess. And then later in the day, I received another email about having done an entirely different, forwarded an email that had people's information on it. And oh my God, another upset about me and confidentiality. And when I received this email this afternoon, I was like, oh, I remember somebody was holding me with warmth and compassion in the ways that I mess up. Oh, and I could kind of lean into that. So this is what we do for each other when we begin to heal and we find healing relationships, is we start to hold specific experiences with warmth, and then the brain begins to have more oomph. It reaches into the amygdala and goes, "Oh, sweetheart, of course you're upset. Of course you're scared. Of course you're angry at yourself. Of course you feel shame. And you know, here you are. Here we are. We're still here." So that's kind of what trauma does to us, and then what healing does to us is strengthen those little arms that we reach for our emotional self with.
And we start to feel safe.
Yeah,
Okay.
safe and calm.
Yes. And in relationships, many different relationships, there's children, there's marriages, friendships, partners, you name it, particularly marriages. We argue. We can argue. What's the difference between healthy relationships when they argue compared to non-healthy relationships when they argue?
Well, the more that we use contempt in our arguments, the more unhealthy we are, and the more unhealthy our partners are. So if we use contempt a lot in our communication with a partner, then the partner actually ends up getting sick more often, and their colds last longer. And if they get some sort of scratch or cut, then it takes 3 days longer for their bodies to
Wow.
heal.
That's how much of
Yeah,
an impact it has on a person.
that's exactly. Yeah. So the healthy way to have arguments is to be vulnerable about being hurt instead of retreating into the shell of being better than the other person and having contempt for them. So if we have a partner who has trouble paying bills, and yet again there's a bill that hasn't been paid and there's a penalty, then we could speak instead of coming at it with contempt and saying, "I can't believe you did this. You never track these things, and don't you understand how much money we end up paying?" And you know, you can sort of hear the contempt in my voice. And then another way to come at it would be vulnerability. I see that this happened again, and I am distressed and worried and scared. and completely, I feel completely helpless about our resources. And there we are, we're in a whole different world of conversation and impact, sharing impact. The more we share impact vulnerably, instead of telling the other person that they're wrong, the healthier our conflicts are.
And the more that trust can build in between the relationship. Because when
Yeah.
we're open and we're honest and we're vulnerable and say, hey, I'm hurting here, it gives the person the chance to act with empathy and it builds
Mhm.
trust. And trust is paramount in any relationship.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
So correct. Yeah.
And how can we start to grow our capacity to handle conflict without fighting, freezing, or fleeing?
Um, by strengthening these arms that reach for the amygdala, because the amygdala is sending the messages to the vagus nerve about fight, flight, alarmed aloneness, and the need to flee. So, so the amygdala is really a seat where we can change a lot of things. Another real interesting thing is that we have this vagus nerve that stretches throughout the whole body, which is in charge of fight, flight, and freeze, and alarmed aloneness. And as we begin to heal, we start to change the way the vagus nerve responds, the way the body responds to danger or threat or the loss of resources or the disappearance of somebody who's really important to us. And as we begin to heal from our trauma, we begin to come into this real sweet relationship with the body where it gets to stay in what's called social engagement, which is the state that we're in when we do feel safe and we do have a sense that we matter and our voice matters. So one of the very best ways to begin to grow our capacity is to start to have resonance buddies and people who are in a resonant support relationship with us, who listen to the places where we got scared or angry and just accompanies us in them instead of telling us that we should do it differently or coaching us to respond better. Or it's this kind of this funnily simple but very difficult thing to accompany somebody else when they're having a hard time.
Holding presence, someone who understands and can
Yeah,
hold presence for you,
yeah. Hold presence and not move into advice.
just to listen.
Yeah.
And how important is that?
Oh, it's everything. It's the foundation of everything. If we make sense to another person, then so not only just having presence and holding space, but letting somebody else make sense to us, trusting in them making sense. And so when we're providing space and holding space and being present with others, we also want to be omnipartial, as I can't remember who said omnipartial, but it's such a good phrase, like partial to everybody, an advocate for everybody in whatever situation one is in. So it's staying really focused on the person that we're with and understanding the context, the larger context that's moving them.
Okay. So healing is critical to have
Yeah.
healthy relationships.
Yeah, unless you were lucky enough to start out with a mom and dad who were had an easy time with resonance and presence holding. Then you can kind of make it through without healing. But for those of us who didn't have that, we get to heal, which is always a very good news.
Because on our healing journeys, we can also learn and grow.
Mhm.
And how do we learn to listen to hear?
How do we learn to listen? Um, I think it comes from being listened to. I think the experience of being listened to and this wonderful idea about our own longing to contribute to others, beginning to mobilize that, to learn what we don't know, and to learn all the ins and outs of what doesn't help so that we can stay with what does help. I mean, I still want to give advice, even though I know very well that it doesn't really help anything. It's so comforting for me to be able to give advice, but it doesn't help.
And why is it common when we are in conflict, we do not hear or understand the person?
Because the amygdala makes a lot of noise, and then we only hear ourselves instead of hearing the other person.
And how can we start to listen to different parts of ourselves? Because we have, if you're aware of IFS, internal family systems, we have many different parts that may be speaking to us. And when we have trauma, at times we can have even more parts. How can we start to listen to the different parts?
Well, I think with someone else's help, if there's somebody else that we can talk to and they can listen in a different way than we can, then we learn from them. So this morning when I woke up to somebody actually making sweet metaphor guesses to me about my difficulty with confidentiality, that was a surprise. I didn't know how to do that for myself because I hadn't done that before. And so she taught me with her email. And so the more we get, the more if we're coming from the insecurely attached childhood and we're growing up, then the more that we can be connected to others who are able to make guesses about us and our context and what we long for and the beauty of our souls, then the more we'll be able to see it ourselves and to be able to be with each of the different voices and parts and trauma memories that exist within us.
Okay, thank you. And even closing our eyes and just
Yeah.
going into our body and listening
Mm-hmm.
and just allowing and becoming a little bit curious. I would
Mm-hmm.
definitely recommend being a resource before doing this, but just allow and just listen to hear what parts are present and then
Beautiful.
allow them to talk to each other
Mm.
and allow it to be softly and welcomed and just do it gently and know all parts are welcome. There's no bad parts
Mm.
and just listen to hear even yourself.
Beautiful.
And how can we start to effectively communicate in conflict, especially when we're feeling triggered?
Well, the more we stay with vulnerability, the better. That's one thing. Another thing is that if we stay with a discipline, the discipline that helps me the most in conflictual conversations with other people, if they are close to me, is to do a modality called IU language, where you make sure there's an I and a you in every sentence, and that you're only saying one sentence at a time, and that you're trying to tell your deepest truth with each sentence that you say. So you say a sentence that has I and you in it. To go back to the example about the money, I am devastated by the by the experience of you not tracking and paying bills on time. So there's an I and a you. And then you stop instead of turning into a prosecuting attorney. This is very good for me because I tend to turn into a prosecuting attorney and tell the person all the things that they've done that have impacted me and why it's bad, and just go on and on and on until I completely can destroy somebody. So this is a discipline, a practice of only saying the most important thing and then waiting and hearing what the other person says, and then again only saying the most important thing. So that's incredibly important for me in intimate conflict. And if the conflict is not intimate, then I tend to just respond with resonance to the other person and make sure I understand them. Because if the conflict isn't intimate, it's not so important for me to express myself.
Because it hits less further away from home.
Yeah,
The
further from
closer
home.
you are to the person, the
Yeah,
closer it hits to home,
so
and the
true.
more painful it can be.
No kidding.
And how can we start to hear other people's perspectives and give ourselves radical responsibility for our parts in conflict?
Mm. Well, I think there's a foundational attitude that we begin to embrace when we begin to think about these things. A foundational attitude of radical responsibility that starts long before the conflict begins. And kind of a pivot into self-responsibility where we have that curiosity that you mentioned earlier, where we get to be curious about why something is hard for us and about what ways we might be triggered by things that have happened in the past and are not actually happening right now in this relationship. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
And why are conflicts healthy in relationships?
Well, I love what Dominic Barter says. He's the fellow who developed restorative circles, did a lot of contribution to restorative circle work down in Brazil. And what he says is that conflict is new information entering a system. Um, I kind of feel like there can be new information that enters the system without conflict. So I like to add new information that we don't want to know that is entering the system. So new information that I don't want to know in the situation of having a partner who can't figure out how to pay the bills is that the partner really does not have the capacity. And if it's something I can do, it's something I should take on. That might be the information I do not want to integrate. I do not want that to be true. I just want my partner to do what they said they would do and take care of the gosh darn bills. And yet, if it's happening over and over again, there's something that has to change. And so what could change? Maybe me, maybe getting a bookkeeper for the family. I don't know what the change would be, but something has to change. So that's the new information that I don't want to know. And the more I don't want to know it, the more I'll blame and have contempt for the other person instead of being able to step into mourning about capacity, which is hugely important as we begin to become radically responsible with conflict.
And it's also looking at our own triggers because
Oh,
in relationships, particularly when we're close, a lot of triggers can come out. And the way we can heal is instead of running away from our triggers, turn and look at our triggers and ask,
mhm.
what are you telling me? And when we ask and we become curious about our own triggers, that's a step to healing.
It's so true.
And what is a healthy approach to dealing with conflict without fighting with others? Personally, I know that's something I don't like. I try to avoid it. So, what's the healthy approach for me with conflict? Instead of fighting, I don't like to fight. So, how can I handle conflict?
Well, to come back to the idea of working on our own triggers, it can be very important to release any unconscious contracts that we have that are embedded in our basal ganglia, telling us that we have to behave in a certain way. For example, that I always need to avoid conflict, no matter what. Then we want to know what is the deep in order to that's rooted in trauma that makes you, me, whoever, not feel comfortable around a conflict situation. Very probably it can be very probably a past experiences, but it can also be our own nervous system, like that voices tend to be raised and become sharp when there's conflict, disagreement, emotional pain, anger, fear, and that can be kind of blow our circuits, even if we don't have any trauma relationship with conflict. So, so beginning to have that warm curiosity about ourselves. Do I have any contracts that that make me run or freeze when when voices get loud and heavy and intense? In which case I can release those contracts and begin to have more curiosity in the moments of conflict about what is one of the questions I love for conflict is what am I trying not to mourn? What do I not want to be true?
Makes sense. I know too, it can be also taught and learned from our
Yeah.
childhood, right? For my family, there was not a lot of conflict. Um, or I should say that differently. Conflict was not like we tried to avoid conflict as much as possible.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
so, as an adult, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Try and
Yeah.
avoid conflict as much as possible.
Right. Right. Mm.
How can we start to have empathy during conflict?
Well, I think the the best thing is to start to have empathy before conflict starts. If you've got it before it starts, it's easier to find it once you're in conflict. If you don't have it at all, it's really hard to get to when you're in conflict.
For sure.
So this is part of our practice, our discipline of asking ourselves, who do I feel contempt for today? Or who do I have no empathy for today? And just doing whatever mourning it is about what we don't want to be true. Um, and yeah, so much mourning. Takes a lot of mourning. Yeah. And and then we're all set to have conflict and be able to remember our intention for empathy.
Okay. Thank you. And what does the word empathy mean to you?
Well, the word empathy actually has 7 different definitions that I've found in scientific research. So you never know when you're reading research what they actually are referring to. So you have to go in and look at what the setup of the research design is to figure out what the scientists are referring to. Sometimes they're talking about feeling other people's feelings. Sometimes they're talking about wanting to help other people. There's all kinds of gradations of both of those. But what I like is the nonviolent communication definition of empathy, which is where we have a warm curiosity for one another's feelings and needs, and that we're wondering about context and emotional experience and capacity for everybody that we're having relationships with, especially when we're in conflict. We really want to know, how do people feel? What do they need? What are they longing for? And that allows us to really understand what empathy is without having to go into a research article.
Okay, thank you. And listening to your heart, even like
And
closing your eyes, going into your body, and just listening. And it's understanding how you would feel maybe in a situation, but I think that it can be even deeper than that because everyone's different. And so what you may like in a situation, the other person may not like. So it's trying to understand other people's perspectives and really listening, going deep and listening to your heart. And how can we heal and repair relationships?
a couple of things come to mind. One is beginning to notice the stories that we tell ourselves about the people around us. And the more that we have an entrenched story, the less healthy the relationship will be. And so if we start to notice, oh, I have a story about this person that they don't have much capacity, then begin to examine it and even to have dialogues about ways that the person had to even to walk toward conflict, to say, uh, I notice that I have a story about you that's getting in the way of connection. Do you have any willingness to have a conversation with me about something that happened where I received harmful impact from your actions, and maybe if I know a little more about what's happening for you, I'll relax a bit. And these kinds of conversations. So conflict becomes really important for the aliveness of connection with other people.
Thank you. And what advice do you have for everyone watching today?
The advice I have for everyone watching today is um, to to listen with to listen to us talking, to me and Aaron talking, and to listen with your heart and your body and see where you relax and what things you say, oh yes, this nourishes me, oh, this doesn't nourish me, so that you get to be the center of your own theater stage. You get to be the star of your own movie. You get to be the center of your own life. And from that place, you get to decide, what are your deep intentions? What are your intentions for contribution? What are your intentions for good? What are your intentions for intimate relationship? And to take actions that allow your body to move closer to what you long for.
Thank you. I agree. Just listening to your heart, right?
Mm.
Often we can go up into our head, and that can be also a coping mechanism, because when we're carrying a lot of pain, it can be easier to go to our head. So it's going back into the body and listening to our heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Beautiful.
how we can grow with healthy relationships. And no one's perfect. And no one's 100% good, no one's 100% bad. We all have flaws. That is what makes us human. But it's healing, and it's trying is what's important.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us.
Thank you.
And I will be leaving Sarah's contact information if you'd like to learn more about nonviolent communication and perhaps take some studies. Sarah is an excellent person to go to. If you'd like some healing somatic sessions, I will also be leaving my information. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. Let's all work together for a more peaceful world through nonviolent communication.